The black town car sliced through the blizzard, a silent, luxurious shark in a sea of swirling white. Inside, Julian Croft stared out at the frosted glass, but he didn't see the snow. He saw spreadsheets, profit margins, and the ghost of a smile he hadn't been able to replicate in 4 years. The city was a blur of muted lights and muffled sounds, a world away from the sterile quiet of his penthouse. His 6-year-old son, Leo, was asleep in his car seat, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that was the only music Julian ever truly heard anymore. It was that rhythm he guarded with the ferocity of a dragon protecting its hoard. The car slowed, caught in a snarl of traffic near a bus shelter, and that's when he saw her, a young woman, her face pale and etched with a desperation so profound it cut through the insulated glass of his car. She clutched a bundled infant to her chest, trying to shield the tiny form from the biting wind with her own inadequate jacket. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She leaned her head against the cold, grimy plexiglass of the shelter and whispered words swallowed by the wind, but which Julian could read on her lips. "I'm so sorry, little one." Mommy tried. What strange twist of fate could take a woman to the absolute edge of despair on a frozen street corner, only to deliver a miracle she never saw coming? The image burned itself onto Julian's mind. He had built an empire, Croft Enterprises, on the principle of calculated, dispassionate logic. Emotion was a liability, a weakness he'd excised from his life after his wife, Isabel, had been stolen from him. But this was different. This was not a variable on a balance sheet. It was raw, human suffering, unfolding just feet from his climate-controlled bubble. "Arthur," he said, his voice startlingly rough in the quiet car. "Pull over." The driver, a man who had been with him for a decade and knew his moods better than anyone, glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression questioning but his hands already complying. "Sir? The roads are—" "Just pull over," Julian repeated, his eyes fixed on the woman. He watched as she shifted the baby in her arms, her movements clumsy with cold. A small, worn teddy bear fell from the folds of her blanket and landed in a slushy pile of snow. She didn't even notice. That tiny, forgotten detail was the final straw. It shattered the icy wall around his heart. He couldn't leave them here. He wouldn't. He thought of Leo, safe and warm beside him, and a wave of something fierce and protective washed over him, extending beyond his own child to the shivering pair in the storm. "Stay with Leo," he commanded Arthur, his hand already on the door handle. The frigid air hit him like a physical blow, but he barely registered it. He strode over to the bus shelter, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the snow. The woman looked up as his shadow fell over her, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. They were a startling shade of hazel, currently shimmering with unshed tears. "Ma'am." His voice was gentle, a tone he rarely used with anyone but his son. She flinched, pulling her baby tighter. "Please, I don't have any money." "I'm not asking for money," he said, shrugging off his heavy wool overcoat. It was a designer piece worth more than a month's rent on a decent apartment, but right now it was just a source of warmth. He draped it over her shoulders, the thick fabric instantly cocooning her and the infant. "You and your child can't stay out here. You'll freeze." She stared at him, bewildered. The coat smelled of sandalwood and success, a scent so alien to her current reality it felt like a dream. Who are you?" "My name is Julian. I have a warm car. My son is in it. Please, let me at least get you somewhere safe for the night." He bent down and picked up the soggy teddy bear, brushing the snow off it with a surprising tenderness. He held it out to her. It was that small act of kindness, the recovery of the one tiny possession her child had, that broke through her fear. Tears finally spilled over, tracking clean paths down her grimy cheeks. "My name is Alara," she whispered, her voice cracking. "And this is Luna." Julian gave her a small, reassuring nod. "It's nice to meet you, Alara." "Luna. Now, let's get you out of this storm." He led her to the car, and Arthur, ever discreet, opened the door without a word. Alara hesitated for a moment, looking from the plush interior to Julian's earnest face, before sliding in. The warmth was dizzying. She hugged Luna closer, inhaling the clean, leathery scent of the car and the lingering sandalwood from the coat that was still draped around her. She looked at the sleeping boy in the car seat, his face angelic in the soft glow of the dashboard lights. Julian got in beside her, creating a space that felt both vast and intimate. "Arthur, drive," he said, his voice low. "Just drive. We'll figure out a destination for the next hour." They drove through the snow-choked city. Alara, thawing slowly, explained her situation in broken sentences. She was a registered nurse. The hospital where she worked had undergone massive budget cuts, and her position had been eliminated. She'd burned through her meager savings trying to find a new job. Her landlord, unsympathetic to her plight, had evicted her that very afternoon. She had no family to turn to, no friends with the resources to help. She was utterly and completely alone. Julian listened without interruption, his stoic expression unreadable. Inside, however, a storm of his own was brewing. He recognized the quiet dignity in her voice, the fierce pride that made it so difficult for her to recount her failures. She wasn't looking for a handout. She was a victim of circumstance, a good person crushed by a system that had no safety nets. He directed Arthur to a discreet, high-end hotel where he kept a suite for visiting executives. He arranged for everything, ensuring Alara and Luna were settled into a warm room with a stocked fridge and a comfortable crib before he even considered leaving. "I'll have some things sent over," he said, standing awkwardly by the door. "Clothes, baby supplies, whatever you need." Alara, who had just put a sleeping Luna down in the crib, turned to face him. The heavy overcoat was pooled around her feet. "Mr. Croft." "Julian, I don't know how to thank you. You've saved our lives tonight." "You don't have to thank me," he said, his gaze softening. "Just get some rest. You're safe here." He left her with a prepaid phone and the promise to call in the morning. Back in his own sterile penthouse, long after he'd put Leo to bed, Julian couldn't sleep. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city that was his kingdom. He had power, wealth, influence. He could solve problems with a phone call, move markets with a memo. And yet, for the past 4 years, he'd been powerless to fix the one thing that was broken: his own life. Finding Alara and Luna had stirred something in him, a sense of purpose beyond profit. The next morning, he didn't just call. He had his private investigator do a discreet but thorough background check on Alara Vance. The report confirmed everything she'd said. She had an impeccable record as a nurse, glowing recommendations from her former supervisors, and not so much as a parking ticket to her name. She was exactly who she appeared to be, a virtuous woman in a desperate situation. That afternoon, he returned to the hotel. He found Alara dressed in the simple clothes he'd had sent over, looking more rested but still fragile. Luna was cooing happily on a playmat on the floor. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I have a proposition for you, Alara." She looked up, her expression wary. "A proposition?" "A job," he clarified. "My son, Leo, he has asthma. It's mostly under control, but it requires constant vigilance. His nanny is wonderful, but she's not medically trained. I need someone who is. I need a live-in private nurse for him. The position comes with a full suite of rooms in my home, a generous salary, and complete medical coverage for you and your daughter." He laid it out like a business deal, stripping it of emotion, hoping it would be more palatable than charity. "It would give me peace of mind, and it would give you stability." Alara stared at him, her mind reeling. A home, a job, safety for Luna. It was everything she had been praying for, delivered by a man who was practically a stranger. But the very scale of his generosity made her suspicious. Life had taught her that nothing came for free. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this for me? You don't know me." Julian met her gaze directly. He respected her caution. It was a sign of intelligence and a protective spirit. "I know you're a qualified nurse. I know you're a devoted mother. And I know what it's like to worry about your child's every breath." The vulnerability in that last admission was unexpected, and it chipped away at her defenses. Still, she held her ground. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Croft, more than you can possibly know. But I can't accept it. Julian's eyebrows furrowed. Why not? Because it feels like pity, and I can't live on someone's pity. My daughter deserves to see her mother standing on her own 2 feet. Her integrity was a tangible thing, a force in the room. It was this, more than her desperation, that solidified Julian's resolve. He wasn't pitying her. He was beginning to admire her. This isn't pity, Alara. It's a transaction. I have a need. You have the skills to meet that need. Your personal circumstances are irrelevant to the professional arrangement. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. However, I understand your concern for safety. Before you make a final decision, I insist you have my background checked. My full name is Julian Croft, CEO of Croft Enterprises. Have your lawyer. I'll provide one if you don't have one. Draw up a contract. We'll do this by the book. Your safety and your daughter's safety are paramount. His willingness to submit to her scrutiny, to level the playing field between them, was the final, deciding factor. It wasn't the act of a man looking to take advantage. It was the act of a man who understood respect. She looked down at Luna, who was now trying to grab her own toes, oblivious to the life-altering conversation happening above her. For her. It was all for her. Okay, Alara said, her voice gaining strength. Okay, Mr. Croft. I accept your offer. On those terms, Julian felt a sense of relief so profound it surprised him. Please, he said, a rare, small smile touching his lips. Call me Julian for the sake of her child. She had cautiously stepped into the gilded cage, unaware that the man who held the key was just as trapped as she was. Moving into Julian's penthouse was like stepping onto another planet. The apartment spanned the top 2 floors of a skyscraper, with panoramic views of the city that made Alara feel dizzy. It was a world of polished marble, gleaming glass, and minimalist art that probably cost more than her entire nursing school education. Her assigned suite was larger than her old apartment, with a cozy bedroom for her, an adjoining nursery for Luna, a private bathroom, and a small sitting area. It was luxurious, but it was also cold, echoing with the silence of a life lived without warmth. Her first few days were a blur of settling in and learning routines. She met Leo's nanny, a kind older woman named Maria who handled his schooling and meals, and who seemed relieved to have a medical professional on hand. And she met Leo. The boy was a miniature version of his father, with the same serious eyes and dark curls, but his reserved nature quickly melted away in the face of Luna's gurgling smiles. He was fascinated by the baby, treating her with a gentle reverence that touched Alara's heart. The connection between Alara and Julian, however, remained professional and stilted. He was polite but distant, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. They communicated mostly through texts about Leo's health. Alara focused on her job, meticulously monitoring Leo's breathing, organizing his medications, and creating a calm, stable environment for him. She treated Julian with a formal respect, always calling him Mr. Croft, determined to maintain the professional boundary he had established. The change began not with them but with the children. One afternoon, Alara was playing with Luna on a soft rug in the main living area when Leo approached, clutching a drawing. "This is for Luna," he said shyly, holding out the piece of paper. Alara smiled. "That's so sweet, Leo. Let's see." The drawing, done in thick crayon, depicted four stick figures. A tall man, a slightly smaller woman, a boy, and a tiny scribbled baby. Above their heads, Leo had drawn a big yellow sun and a house. "That's my daddy," he said, pointing to the tall figure. "And that's me. And that's you. And that's Luna. We're all in our house." Alara's breath caught in her throat. The innocent, profound observation of a child had articulated a truth she hadn't even dared to consider. It wasn't just a penthouse anymore. For him, it was a house, a home, with the four of them in it. Julian walked in at that exact moment, having come home early for once. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Alara sitting on the floor, his son standing proudly beside her, and the drawing that had rendered her speechless. "What's this?" he asked, his voice soft. Leo ran to him, holding up the picture. I drew our family, Daddy. Julian took the drawing, his long fingers tracing the waxy lines. He looked at the 4 figures, then at Alara, whose cheeks were now flushed. For the first time, he saw her not as an employee, not as a project, but as the woman his son had placed at the heart of their home. A flicker of something warm and unfamiliar sparked in his chest. That evening, he didn't retreat to his office after dinner. He sat with Alara in the living room while the children slept. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but comfortable. "He's a good kid," Alara said quietly, breaking the silence. "You've raised a wonderful son, Julian." The use of his first name felt natural, right? "He's had good people around him," Julian replied, his eyes on the city lights. "Maria, his teachers," he paused. "But he's been quieter since his mother passed. I haven't seen him this happy in a long time. You've brought a different kind of energy to this place." "Luna has, you mean?" She deflected, uncomfortable with the direct praise. "Children have a way of doing that." "No," he said, turning to look at her fully. "I mean you, Alara. You've brought life back into these rooms." The intensity of his gaze made her heart flutter. The vast, cold penthouse was slowly shrinking, the space between them charged with an unspoken emotion. The professional lines were beginning to blur, not because of any transgression, but because of the simple, undeniable pull of 2 lonely souls finding solace in each other's presence, all under the watchful, innocent eyes of their children. The turning point came on a Tuesday, a night like any other. A storm raged outside, rattling the immense windows of the penthouse, a faint echo of the blizzard that had first brought them together. Alara had just checked on both sleeping children when she heard a harsh, rasping sound from Leo's room. Her training kicked in instantly. She rushed to his bedside and saw him struggling for breath, his small face tight with panic. It was a severe asthma attack, the kind that could escalate in seconds. With practiced calm, she administered his rescue inhaler and then set up his nebulizer, her voice a low, soothing murmur as she coached him through the breathing treatment. "That's it, buddy. Slow, deep breaths. You're doing great. I'm right here with you." Julian must have heard the commotion. He burst into the room, his face a mask of stark terror. He was wearing a suit, having just gotten home, his tie loosened. He saw his son, the mask over his face, the wheezing sound that was the soundtrack to his worst nightmares, and he froze. All the power, all the control he wielded in the boardroom vanished. He was just a terrified father. "Is he?" he started, his voice choked. Alara looked up at him, her expression calm but firm. "He's okay, Julian. His oxygen levels are coming up. The nebulizer is working. I need you to stay calm for him." Her competence was an anchor in his sea of panic. He watched her, not as an employer watching an employee, but as a man watching a woman save his world. She held Leo's small hand, her thumb rubbing gentle circles on his skin, her focus entirely on the child. After 20 minutes that felt like an eternity, Leo's breathing eased. The panic subsided from his eyes, replaced by a sleepy exhaustion. Alara tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and promised to stay in the chair by his bed until he was fast asleep. Julian waited for her in the kitchen, pouring 2 glasses of water with a hand that still trembled slightly. When she finally emerged, her shoulders slumped with a fatigue that was more emotional than physical. He handed her a glass. "Thank you," he said. The words were inadequate, flimsy things for the gratitude that was flooding him. "You were incredible. It's my job," she said softly, taking a sip of water. "No," he insisted, his voice raw. "It was more than that. You weren't just a nurse in there." He ran a hand through his hair, the carefully constructed walls around him crumbling. He looked out at the rain-streaked window, but he was seeing another night, another storm of a different kind. The night Isabel, the night she died, it was an asthma attack, just like that one, came out of nowhere. I was in Tokyo for a business meeting. She called me, said she was having trouble breathing. I told her to use her inhaler to call 911. I told her I was getting on the first flight home. His voice broke. He took a deep, shuddering breath before continuing. By the time my plane landed, she was gone. I never got to say goodbye. I wasn't there. The confession hung in the air, heavy and heartbreaking. Alara's heart ached for him. She finally understood the source of his fear, the reason for his tightly controlled world. It wasn't a desire for power. It was a desperate attempt to prevent the uncontrollable from ever hurting him again. Every time Leo wheezes, he whispered, his gaze distant. I'm back in that airport, hearing the news. I feel so helpless. Alara reached out and placed her hand over his on the marble countertop. It was a simple, instinctive gesture of comfort. You're not helpless, Julian, and you are not alone in this anymore. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. His skin was cold, but his grip was strong, desperate. He looked at her, his dark eyes shimmering with a vulnerability she'd never seen before. In that moment, he wasn't the powerful CEO, and she wasn't the grateful employee. They were just two people who understood loss, who understood fear, and who were finding an unexpected, profound connection in the shared silence of a stormy night. The last wall between them had fallen. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the penthouse transformed. The stilted formality evaporated, replaced by an easy warmth that settled into the very bones of the place. Laughter, a sound that had been absent for years, now echoed in the long hallways, mostly from the children, but increasingly from the adults as well. Julian began to restructure his days. Late-night meetings were canceled. International trips were delegated. He started coming home not just for dinner, but sometimes for lunch. He wanted to be there for bath time, for bedtime stories. He wanted to be there for Alara. They fell into a rhythm that felt less like an employment arrangement and more like a partnership. They made parenting decisions together, celebrated small milestones together. Luna's first tooth, Leo's triumphant reading of a whole book. They would often sit together late at night after the children were asleep, talking for hours. She told him about her dreams of working in pediatric oncology, and he told her about his vision for a more philanthropic future for his company. They were discovering the people they were behind their prescribed roles of survivor and CEO one Saturday. Julian declared it a family day. They didn't do anything extravagant. They went to Central Park, a bundled-up, mismatched little group. Julian pushed Luna in her stroller while Alara held Leo's hand. They bought hot pretzels from a street vendor and sat on a cold park bench, their breath misting in the air. Julian watched Alara as she broke off a tiny piece of pretzel for a delighted Leo. Her face lit up with a genuine, unburdened smile. He realized, with a jolt that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that he was falling in love with her. He was falling for her quiet strength, her boundless compassion, her unwavering integrity. He was falling for the way she made his cold, empty house feel like a vibrant, loving home. Later that afternoon, back in the warmth of the penthouse, the children were napping. Alara was in the kitchen, humming softly as she tidied up. Julian came and stood behind her, his presence filling the space. "Alara," he said, his voice low and serious. She turned, a question in her eyes. He didn't say anything more. Instead, he gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand, but one of tenderness and deep, burgeoning emotion. It was a kiss that tasted of gratitude, of hope, of home. It was a confirmation of everything that had been growing between them, unspoken but deeply felt. When they broke apart, they simply looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They had found each other in a storm, two shipwrecked souls, and had somehow, against all odds, built a lifeboat for four. This period of quiet domestic bliss was their honeymoon, a fragile, perfect bubble of happiness where the outside world and its harsh judgments ceased to exist. They were simply Julian and Alara, Leo and Luna, family, but they both knew on some level that bubbles were made to burst. The bubble burst on a crisp autumn afternoon in the form of Eleanor Croft. Julian's mother was the matriarch of the Croft dynasty, a woman forged from old money and unbendable steel. She ran the family's philanthropic foundation with an iron fist and viewed the world as a strict hierarchy, with the Crofts perched firmly at the top. She arrived at the penthouse unannounced, sweeping in on a cloud of expensive perfume and silent disapproval. Julian was at the office, and Alara was playing with the children in the living room. Eleanor stopped short at the sight of her, her perfectly arched eyebrows rising a fraction of an inch. Her gaze swept over Alara's simple jeans and sweater, lingered on Luna gurgling on the playmat, and then settled on Leo, who was showing Alara his latest Lego creation. "And you are?" Eleanor asked, her voice as cold and smooth as the marble floor. "I'm Alara Vance," Alara said, standing up and instinctively moving slightly in front of the children. "I'm Leo's nurse." "The nurse," Eleanor repeated, the words dripping with condescension. "I see." Julian failed to mention he'd hired new staff over the next hour. Eleanor subjected Alara to a polite but brutal interrogation disguised as small talk. She inquired about Alara's family, her education, her previous employment, her situation with Luna's father. Each question was a carefully aimed dart, designed to highlight Alara's unsuitability, her lower-class origins, her otherness. Alara answered with quiet dignity, refusing to be rattled, but she felt every barb. She felt like an insect being examined under a microscope. When Julian arrived home, he was not pleased to find his mother there. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Mother," he said, his tone clipped. "This is a surprise. I was in the neighborhood," she said, offering her cheek for a kiss he didn't give. "I wanted to see my grandson, and to meet your new nurse." The way she said the word nurse made it sound like an insult. Over the following weeks, Eleanor became a constant, unwelcome presence. She would drop by unannounced, bearing extravagant gifts for Leo that subtly undermined Alara's authority. She would make comments in front of Alara about the importance of good breeding and suitable matches. She invited a string of beautiful, accomplished heiresses to family dinners, parading them in front of Julian as if Alara were invisible. "Julian, darling," she'd say at one such dinner, smiling at the daughter of a shipping magnate, "don't you think Alexandra would be a wonderful chair for the hospital gala? She has such poise." Alara endured it all with a quiet grace that infuriated Eleanor even more. She never complained to Julian, not wanting to put him in the middle, but the constant scrutiny was wearing her down. The feeling of being an outsider, a charity case, began to creep back in, threatening the security she had so carefully built. The penthouse no longer felt like a safe haven. It felt like contested territory. Julian, caught between the woman he loved and the mother he had a complicated duty to, grew increasingly frustrated. He tried to run interference to shield Alara, but Eleanor was a master tactician. The honeymoon was definitively over, replaced by a Cold War fought in the hushed, luxurious rooms of the penthouse, and Alara knew she was the one in danger of becoming a casualty. Eleanor, realizing her subtle tactics were failing to drive a wedge between her son and the nurse, decided it was time for a full-scale assault. She hired the same private investigator Julian had used, but for a far more malicious purpose. She wanted every piece of leverage, every skeleton, every shred of hardship from Alara's past that could be twisted into a weapon. The dossier she received was everything she had hoped for. The eviction notice, the final, desperate text messages to friends who couldn't help. The identity of Luna's father, a man who had abandoned a pregnant Alara without a second thought. To Eleanor, this wasn't a story of a woman's resilience. It was the portrait of an unstable, desperate gold digger. She waited until Julian was locked in a critical, all-day board meeting, a time she knew he would be unreachable. Then she descended upon the penthouse. She found Alara in the nursery, gently rocking Luna to sleep. "We need to talk," Eleanor said, her voice devoid of any warmth. She led the way to Julian's study, a room of dark wood and leather that felt like a courtroom. She didn't sit down. She stood behind the massive desk like a judge about to pass sentence. "I know everything, Ms. Vance," she began, her tone triumphant. "I know about your eviction. I know you were penniless. I know you were sleeping in a bus shelter when my son found you. A very convenient, very public place to be found, wasn't it? Elara flinched as if struck. What do you want, Eleanor? I want you to be realistic, she sneered. You cannot possibly believe this little fairy tale has a happy ending. You do not belong in this family. You are a temporary diversion for my son, a project born of his lingering grief. Once he fully heals, he will see you for what you are. Elara's chin came up. And what is that? An opportunist. A woman who saw a wealthy, vulnerable man and latched on. You are endangering my grandson's future, staining the Croft name with your history. Eleanor opened a sleek leather briefcase on the desk and pulled out a checkbook. She wrote out a figure with several zeros, tore it from the book, and pushed it across the polished surface of the desk. This is a severance package. A generous one. Enough to buy a house, start a new life for you and your child. Far away from here. Take it and disappear. Elara looked at the check, then back at Eleanor's cold, triumphant face. A fire ignited in her chest, burning away her fear and hurt. My life is not for sale, she said, her voice shaking with quiet fury. And neither is my daughter's happiness. I love your son, and what you see as my shameful history, he sees as my strength. I will not be bought. Eleanor's face hardened into a mask of pure rage. The polite facade was gone. You foolish, foolish girl, she hissed. You think love matters in this world? Power is what matters. And I have it. If you refuse to leave, I will make your life a living hell. I will leak your story to the tabloids. Grieving CEO preyed upon by homeless nurse. I will use my foundation's connections to see to it you are blacklisted from every hospital in this state. And I will petition the court for custody of your child, on the grounds that you are an unstable and unfit mother. By the time I'm done with you, you will have nothing. The threat against Luna was the final, devastating blow. Elara felt the world tilt on its axis. She could withstand the insults, the slander, the loss of her career, but the thought of losing her daughter, that was a price she could not pay. Defeated, heartbroken, she stared at the woman who would destroy her life without a second thought, and she knew she had lost. When Julian returned that evening, exhausted but triumphant from his meeting, the penthouse was eerily silent. He found Elara in her room, her face pale and tear-streaked, packing a small suitcase with her and Luna's belongings. The sight sent a spear of ice through his heart. Elara? What's going on? He asked, his voice tight with alarm. She wouldn't look at him. I have to leave, Julian. It's for the best. The best for who? He demanded, stepping in front of her, forcing her to stop. Don't do this. Talk to me. Is this about my mother? Her silence was all the answer he needed. A cold, hard anger, the likes of which he hadn't felt in years, began to build within him. He gently took her by the shoulders, making her face him. He saw the raw pain and defeat in her eyes. What did she do? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. In a choked whisper, Elara told him everything. The threats, the check, the plan to ruin her career and take Luna away. I can't fight her, Julian, she finished, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. She's too powerful. I can't risk losing my daughter. I have to go, to protect you from the scandal, to protect Luna from her. Julian listened, his expression hardening into granite. This was his fault. He had let his mother's poison seep into their home, and now it was destroying the most precious thing he had found. The wounded healer was gone, replaced by the formidable CEO, the man who knew how to fight and win. This was not a negotiation. It was a war, and the future of his family was at stake. You're not going anywhere, he stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Wait here. He strode out of the room and down the hall to the guest suite where his mother was staying. He threw the door open without knocking. Eleanor was on the phone, no doubt setting her plans in motion. She looked up, startled. Julian, you're meeting? Hang up the phone, mother, he commanded, his voice like ice. She did, her eyes narrowing. I've just spoken with Elara, he said, his voice dangerously low. You will call off your lawyers. You will call off the tabloids. You will undo every single thing you have done to terrorize the woman I love, Eleanor scoffed. The woman you love? Julian, be serious. She is a nobody who… She… Julian interrupted, his voice rising with a power she had not heard since his father was alive. Is the mother of the little girl who will be my daughter. She is the woman who is going to be my wife. She and Luna, along with Leo, are my family. This is my home. And you are no longer welcome in it if you cannot treat every member of my family with love and respect. He pulled out his own phone. With a few swift taps, he began transferring funds. I am severing your access to my personal accounts, he said, his eyes locked on hers. The foundation is a family legacy, and I will not touch it. But your personal allowance, your access to my resources, is finished. You will not use my money to destroy my life. Eleanor stared at him, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. Her power, her leverage, had always been tied to the family fortune. A fortune her son now controlled completely. She had overplayed her hand, and in one swift, decisive move, he had checkmated her. You would choose her over your own mother? She whispered, aghast. I am choosing the family I am building over the one you are trying to tear apart, he said, his voice final. You made Alara choose between money and love. Now I am giving you a choice. You can accept our family, all of it, or you can have no part in it at all. The decision is yours. He turned and walked away, leaving a stunned and utterly defeated Eleanor in his wake. He went back to Alara's room. She was standing right where he had left her, her eyes wide. He walked straight to her, wrapped his arms around her and held her tight. It's over, he whispered into her hair. No one will ever hurt you or Luna again. I promise. In that moment, he wasn't just protecting her. He was declaring his commitment, solidifying their future, and transforming from a man haunted by the past into a man ready to fight for his future. 1 year later, the penthouse was unrecognizable. The minimalist art had been replaced with framed crayon drawings. The stark white rugs were dotted with colorful toys. The echoing silence had been filled with the constant, joyful noise of 2 growing children. It was no longer a showpiece. It was a home, vibrant and full of life. Alara was no longer just a resident. She was the heart of that home. With Julian's full support and funding, she had spearheaded the creation of a new, state-of-the-art pediatric oncology wing at the city's public hospital, named the Isabel Croft Center for Children. She divided her time between managing the center and being a full-time mother to Leo and Luna, who were now an inseparable, rambunctious pair. She had found not just security, but a profound sense of purpose she had only dreamed of. Julian was a man reborn. The ghosts that had haunted him were gone, replaced by the love of his new family. He was present, engaged, and genuinely happy. He had rediscovered his own humanity in the reflection of Alara's unwavering kindness. His relationship with his mother remained strained, but Eleanor, faced with the choice of being a grandmother on Julian's terms or not at all, had chosen the former. Her visits were infrequent and carefully supervised, but she was slowly, grudgingly, coming to accept the new reality. One evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Julian found Alara standing by the great window, looking out at the glittering tapestry of city lights below. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She leaned back against him, sighing contentedly. "I was just thinking about that first night, the snowstorm. I was so scared, so alone. I thought my life was over. I was the one who was lost that night." "Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He turned her around to face him, his dark eyes full of a love so deep it took her breath away. "My life was a series of empty rooms and silent meetings. I was just a ghost in a fancy suit. You and Luna, you saved me. You taught me how to live again." He slowly sank to one knee on the plush rug, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a single perfect diamond that shone like a star. "Alara Vance," he said, his voice steady and sure. "You are the strongest, kindest, most incredible woman I have ever known. You are the most wonderful mother to our children." Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of pure joy streamed down Alara's face. She nodded, unable to speak, and held out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. He stood and pulled her into a passionate kiss, a promise of all the years to come. Their journey had begun in the cold despair of a winter storm, but it had led them to the enduring warmth of a love that had healed them both. It served as a reminder that the greatest wealth is not found in what one has, but in what one is willing to give, and that true family is built not by blood, but by the unwavering strength of a loving heart. If you were touched by this heartwarming tale of love and redemption, please like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories. Your support helps us continue to bring these inspirational narratives to life. Let us know in the comments what part of Julian and Alara's journey moved you the most.